You can make a difference. By becoming a supporter of our channel, you not only help us thrive, but also become an active part of our community. The link to join us is in the description. We know that the nation of Israel was formed by 12 descendant tribes of the children of Jacob. One of these children was called Dan, and he was the founder of the Danitist tribe. It is true that the Bible provides little information about who Dan was, but it records some important facts about the story of its tribe. Even based on some of this information, there is a very old interpretation within Christianity that suggests that the Antichrist will belong to the Dan. Speculation about the origin of the Antichrist aroused the curiosity of many people. But how did this story come about that the Antichrist will come from Dan's tribe? Is there any biblical basis for this interpretation? Who really was Dan, and what is the true story of your tribe in the Bible? All of this we'll find out in this video. Let's start understanding who is actually Dan. We know that Jacob, Dan's father, was married with two women, Leah and Rachel. Rachel was Jacob's favorite woman, but she was sterile for many years. At that time, sterility was a very big problem, because, among other things, sterility could imply the family contempt of sterile woman, a source of personal shame, a future helplessness in the lack of children, and even in a symbol of misfortune and divine disapproval, since often motherhood was seen as a proof of God's blessing on women's life. At that time, in the old nearby East, there was also the habit that when a legitimate wife could not get pregnant, she could resort to her personal servant. In practice, the wife granted her servant to her husband so that he could generate an heir through her. Thus, the official wife would become the legal mother of this son conceived through her personal servant. Basically, this is what happened, for example, in the plot involving Sarah and Agar, when Abraham he made Ishmael's father through the Egyptian servant of his wife, Sarah. Rachel, despite being Jacob's beloved woman, faced the deep pain of infertility. While Leah, her rival sister, had given several children to Jacob, Rachel remained without children. Then, in an act of despair, Rachel offered her Bilhah servant to Jacob so she could have children through her. Bilhah then conceived and gave birth to a son, which Rachel called him Dedan. The meaning of this name has to do with Rachel's perception that God had judged his cause, heard his voice, and given him a son. But Jacob's family was marked by tensions and rivalries. Jacob had 12 children with 4 different women, Leah, Rachel, and the Bilhah and Zilpah servants. This polygamous family structure generated constant jealousy and conflicts. Dan, being the son of a servant, probably faced an ambiguous social position within the family. Although it was recognized as one of Jacob's legitimate children, his mother Bilhah did not have the same status that Red and Rachel. So it is safe to say that Dan grew up amid intense family disputes. The rivalry between Leah and Rachel not only affected the relationship between Jacob's wives, but also influenced the dynamics among children. Dan, along with his brothers, participated in the daily activities of the family, such as taking care of the flock and working on the earth. These shared tasks promoted both cooperation and further inflammation of family rivalries. A proof of this was the episode in which Joseph, son of Rachel, was betrayed and sold by his own brothers. Although Dan is not specifically mentioned as part of that plot, the environment of distrust and hostility certainly affected it. The Bible also reports that Dan was the father of a son named Osim or Swud. In the book of Genesis, we find the registration of Jacob's prophetic blessings about his children. These blessings spoke of the future of the descent of each son of Jacob in the composition of the nation. In other words, prophetically, Jacob's blessings on his children foreshadowed the history of the tribes of Israel. Specifically about the Idown, the patriarchal blessing of Jacob was as follows. Scholars have interpreted these words on Dan's tribe in different ways. The one that seems to be the best interpretation in the light of the biblical text says that Jacob's words, in fact, describe the characteristics later by Dan's tribe. For example, in the first part of Jacob's blessing, it is said that the tribe of Dan would judge his people. In fact, for some time this tribe executed the court among the children of Jacob. Even Samson, one of the judges of Israel, belonged precisely to Dan's tribe. In the second part of Jacob's blessing, Dan's tribe is also compared to a treacherous serpent that bites the horse's heels to overthrow his knight. This may well be a reference to the aggressiveness of Dan's tribe and its tendency to deceit. Although the tribe from Dan was small compared to other tribes, she was very cunning and dangerous, to the point of attacking mortally and without pitying much larger nations. This is in harmony with the words of Moses in Deuteronomy, chapter 33, verse 22, when referring to Dan as a little lion who would jump from Bazan. After the conquest of Canaan under the leadership of Joshua, the earth was divided between the 12 tribes of Israel. The Dan tribe received a portion located in the Midwest of Canaan, adjacent to the tribes of Ephraim, Benjamin, and Judah. This area included cities and towns such as Zorah, Estahol, and Ilah. The location was strategic, but also challenging, as the Danites often faced conflicts with local people better prepared than them. So initially, Dan's tribe had difficulty expelling the locals and taking full possession of their inheritance. Judges, chapter 1, verse 34, informs us that the Amorites pushed the Danites into the mountains, not allowing to come down to the valley. This situation forced the Danites to seek alternatives to establish themselves firmly. Thus, due to the inability to completely master its designated land, a dead-end tribe group explored new areas for housing. In Judges 18, we read how they sent spies that found the land of Lai, a quiet, vulnerable city in the far north of Canaan. The Danites then attacked Lai, killed their inhabitants, and renamed the city as Dan, rebuilding it in their own way. Even so, some remnants of the Dan tribe remained in its original territory. And a curiosity here is that, as the city of Dan was in the far north, sometimes the Bible uses Dan's expression to beat bar to indicate the north and south limits, respectively, from the land occupied by the Israelites. In the city of Dan was also established a sanctuary with a priesthood that accepted to corrupt itself with idolatry. At that time, the worship center was in Shiloh, where it was the tabernacle before the establishment of Jerusalem as political and religious capital in the time of King David. But the Danites decided to have their own center of worship, in a clear attitude of disobedience to the Lord. The end of chapter 18 of the Judges book describes how the Danites raised as an idol a sculpted image that had been taken as a mica and established the grandson of Moses, Jonathan, as a priest, thus showing a deep spiritual corruption. This deviation to idolatry had lasting consequences. The city of Dan became a symbol of unfaithfulness to God, marking the tribe as one of the first to move away from true worship. Later, in the time of the divided kingdom monarchy, King Jeroboam I established in that same place the cult of the golden calf, reaffirming Dan's spiritual that would eventually lead the nation to captivity and the dispersion of the tribes of Israel. The strategic location of the Dan tribe, especially after its migration to the north, made it a frequent confrontation point with neighboring peoples, including the Philistines and other Canaanites. As has been said, Samson, one of Israel's most famous judges, was from the Dan tribe, and his life was marked by violent clashes with the Philistines, thus reflecting the continuous struggle of the Danites to maintain their identity and territory. But where did the story come from that the Antichrist will come from the Dan tribe? Dan's absence on the list of the tribes sealed in the book of Revelation has led some theologians and interpreters to speculate that this omission implies something significant. One of the theories to explain this supposed hidden meaning is that the Antichrist would come from Dan. Irenæus de Leon, one of the parents of the 2nd century church, seems to have been one of the first to suggest this interpretation. He argued that the aggressive and treacherous nature of Dan, as propheted by Jacob, he could point to the coming of the Antichrist of this tribe. Adherents of this theory also use as part of their argument the idolatrous behavior that characterized the Danites throughout the biblical history, and Jeremiah's prophecy about Judah's judgment that says from Dan the noise of their fast horses would be heard. In Jeremiah chapter 8 and verse 16, there is not even a passage in the Bible that explicitly states that the Antichrist will come from the Dan tribe. This interpretation is based on inferences and thematic connections, not in clear statements from Scripture. In addition, Jacob's prophetic words were fulfilled in the past history of the Dan tribe. Already, the prophecy of the prophet Jeremiah referred to the sins and judgments of Judah, pronouncing the destruction that would come from all sides in the time of captivity in Babylon. That is, There is no nothing in this prophecy that makes a connection with the emergence of the Antichrist at the end of time. Finally, the list of Israel's tribes in the book of Apocalypse, which omits the tribe of Edom, is often seen as symbolic, as it is part of a text characterized by the wide use of symbologies. This omission of Dan may reflect specific theological or literary issues of the Apocalypse text, not necessarily prophecies about the Antichrist. For example, Dan was not the only tribe characterized by idolatry. Ephraim, the dominant tribe of the northern kingdom, also had its history marked by the same sin. And curiously, imagine the Ephraim tribe was not listed in Revelation either. Therefore, associating Dan's absence on the tribal list in the Antichrist apocalypse can be excessive simplification. Most likely, the absence of Dan and Ephraim is precisely a censorship against idolatry, because in the apocalypse, idolatrous behavior is emphatically condemned. And it is worth remembering that the Danites raped the covenant by preferring to the land that the Lord gave them by inheritance. Everything the Danites did as they retired from the land of their inheritance did not have divine trial. For all this, some interpreters suggest that the absence of Dan in the book of Revelation can simply indicate the severity of God's judgment on idolatry, as well as a reminder of the need for faithfulness to the Lord, serving as a warning to all believers. Moreover, another point that makes any connection of Dan's tribe and the person of the Antichrist is very unlikely that the northern tribes of Israel were so dispersed in the times of exile that there is no way to draw a reliable lineage of a specific tribe. So when you hear someone saying that Antichrist will arise from Dan's tribe, be aware that this is but pure speculation without any biblical foundation. Therefore, instead of fixing ourselves in theories uncertain, we must focus on what really matters about the history of the Dan tribe, in order to avoid the same mistakes that the damned have made and keep faithful to our call as followers of Christ. In this sense, the history of the Dan tribe can teach us about the need for constant vigilance against idolatry in our lives. We can never fall into the error of trying to establish a parallel worship of the true God. Just as the Danites did, we must identify and eliminate anything that occupies God's place in our hearts, whether material goods, social status, or other priorities that move us from our exclusive devotion to the Lord. The Dan tribe's trajectory, with its difficulties in establishing a territory and subsequent deviations, also teaches us about the importance of remaining faithful to God, even in times of adversity and temptation. Unlike the Danites who departed from God when seeking security and success for his own means, we must trust in divine provision and direction, even when we face seemingly insurmountable challenges. Finally, Dan's omission on the list of tribes sealed in Revelation reminds us of the seriousness of God's judgment against idolatry and infidelity. However, we also see the grace of God at his disposal to redeem and restore. We are called to reflect on our own lives, seeking repentance and renewal, and to live in a way that honor the covenant we have with the Lord. Now write in the comments if you already knew the story of Dan's tribe and what you think about the theory that Antichrist will belong to this tribe.
Thank you for joining us today at Path of Faith. Your engagement means the world to us. So please take a moment to leave your comments, like this video, share it with friends and family, and subscribe for more enriching content.